Hello, Hinikaragi. Chakshap Jijinga Hingarina. My name is Alexandrea Walker, and I am a citizen of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. I am a youth organizer with Great Plains Action Society, and I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keely Driscoll. I am a Meskwaki with ties to the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska, and I'm also a youth organizer with Great Plains Action Society. Tonight, we are really excited to welcome our guest speakers and share their knowledge and efforts that they have made to address voter suppression and get out the vote efforts in various BIPOC communities across Iowa.
Hello there, good to be here. And I'm Joe Enriquez Henry with the League of United Latin American Citizens and Forward Latino. So I'm ready to discuss voting anytime you all are ready. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, okay. Should I go ahead and start first?
Yeah, that would be sure. Great.
Okay, how much time do I have? Do you want to put a limit on it?
No, we're set to end this panel at 7:30. So, I mean, your limit is pretty.
Okay. So, yeah, so it's good to be here. You know, coming from the Latino community, I grew up in Iowa, but I also spent time in Washington, D.C. In my 30s and 40s, working for the Teamsters Union. It was at that point, about 30 years ago, that I began my work on voter engagement, mobilizing, and so forth. But it wasn't until I got back to Iowa in the early 2000s of working within my Latino community on voter engagement. And what was one of the important things that we did in Iowa in the Latino community is we started to tabulate the amount of Latino voters, registered Latino voters in Iowa. And we used a filtering system to go through the 2 million records of voters here in Iowa to establish in 2007 the first ever Latino registered voter database here in Iowa, which at that point was 23,000 identified Latino voters. Now we have over 70,000 identified, but we're guesstimating that we have 100,000 registered Latino voters. In the last 10 years, as we were building momentum, we also experienced voter suppression in Iowa, which began in 2012 with Secretary of State Matt Schultz, a Republican, who attempted to purge Latino voters who had last names that were compared with the last names of those people who were undocumented. Total scam, but he attempted to get away with it. And we worked through the ACLU of Iowa to put forth a lawsuit in 2012. After about 6 months of legislative action and going into the courtroom, we were able to prevent a purge of several thousand Latino voters during that attempted scam by the Secretary of State. After that, we did experience another voter suppression law that was enacted in 2017 in Iowa, which was an attempt again to remove Black and brown voters, seniors, and young voters from the voter rolls using different scenarios, using electronic signature verification, also on preventing us from registering voters at their homes, and also from picking up early ballots from voters. We were able to win most of the voter suppression law that was enacted that year and do a rollback. But we did lose some early voting time because in 2017 and for several decades, voters had 40 days to vote early before Election Day. Due to the law that was enacted then, the state, through the Republican dominated legislature was able to roll back that to 29 days. So we were not able to win on that front. But we were able to prevent electronic voter comparison, signature verification. We were able to stop that. We were able to continue to do early balloting, picking up early ballots, to send out also early ballot request forms. We were able to do that. And we were able to do a number of other things at the voting locations on Election Day. Then again, in 2021, we dealt with another voter suppression law here in Iowa, which again, the Latino community, Brown community, Native American community, young and old, were targeted again. And this time there was another attempt to roll back early voting again to 20 days to prevent people from voting early insofar as having groups such as LULAC pick up their filled out ballot that they would receive in the mail. And then there were a number of other things, the reduction of time to register to vote, how to vote, who, again, like I said before, who could pick up the ballot, all again targeted towards us, the growing voting base here in Iowa. So clearly with brown and black communities, young and old, but specifically communities of color, because we're a growing segment, we're about 15% of the voting base here in Iowa in the population, and a declining older white voting base. There were those in power on the Republican side who felt it was in their interest to put forth these roadblocks. A modern Jim Crow is what we would consider it in comparison. So we're taking that on right now. We're working to get into the courtroom. We have our lawsuit in place, which was put forth last year. If people have been reading the papers, we're also putting out a request to retrieve emails from 11 Republican legislators who participated in putting forth this bill and getting it passed last year, because our attorneys want to know why they put forth this bill. Was this politically motivated? Was this for the purpose of preventing brown and black communities from voting? We want to know. So that's one of our requests. That's going to the Iowa Supreme Court to find out if we can access those emails. Along with that, we're also taking on a law that was enacted back in 2001, which was called the English Only Law, which has been used since 2008 to only put voting material in English, except for two counties in Iowa. One is Buena Vista, and the other one is Tama. And those are two counties that meet the level of voter participation that would allow federal guidelines, I forget what that is, Voting Rights Act, sorry about that, that prevents those counties from doing ballot material, election material in only English. So in those two counties, out of 99 counties, ballots in election material must be in Spanish in Buena Vista. And in Tama, it must be in a Native American language, a specific Native American language, because of the high proportion of voters in that county, and then again in Buena Vista with Latino voters. So those two counties, we get the opportunity to have election material translated in other languages, but not the other 97 counties. So we have taken on that law, even though it was put forth, adopted in 2001, but utilized on voting in 2008. We feel that we have a strong case, and that will be heard in district court here in Iowa sometime very soon. There's already been a decision made on it about how far we can argue our case. So we're waiting to get back into court on that. So kind of summarizing what we've been doing in the Latino community is that we have been working very hard over the last 2 decades to identify who our voters are. We've also been out there to do voter registration and mobilization. And we've spent a lot of time on going through those voter registration forms, those data files that each county has across the state. And we encourage every county in Iowa where we have voters and where brown and black communities are at, is to access those data files. That is right. That is your right as a citizen to request the voting rolls of all registered voters within a particular county or the state of Iowa for a small amount of money, to use that data to find out who in your community is registered to vote, and then to reach out to them through door knocking, mailings, phone calling, texting. We know that this voting is the most important thing. This is the thing that was fought for in the civil rights movement, but it actually goes back over 100 years. It goes back to the Civil War, what the North was fighting for, even though there's a lot of different reasons the North was fighting for in the Civil War. But the fighting to make sure that people of the Black community could vote after the Civil War, and then the attacks on the Black community with the Jim Crow laws a decade later that impacted the Black community. But these fights are very important. These are the only ways that we can ensure democracy, justice, the rights of working people. It's a major path forward when we do it. We can never forget how important it is. So for any type of social justice action, it must always be connected to voting and to making sure more people are registered to vote. Some would say it doesn't matter, it is important. But if it didn't matter and if it wasn't important, we wouldn't have these attacks from the right wing. We wouldn't have these attacks by those who are conservative, by those who have self-interest, by those who don't want to hear our voice. So these are all very important things. Again, that's why we're involved. Another thing that's very important is not just in Iowa, but in about 37 states across the country, these voter suppression acts have been enacted. And these type of laws really go back about 10 years, back to 2012, and also back to a certain conservative in Kansas who was the Secretary of State at that point in time. So lots of stuff to discuss during this forum that we're having here tonight. But I just kind of want to let you all know what we were doing within the Latino community and what's so important to all of us from all our communities. So thank you for having me on.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and thank you for your work across Iowa and pushing voting rights and getting the word out on events like these. At this time, I'd also like to welcome Keely Purscell, another one of our guest speakers.
Hi, everybody.
Okay. If you'd like to introduce yourself at this time and share a little bit of what your experience has been with voter suppression in Iowa.
Sure. First of all, thank you both for having me tonight. My name is Keely Purscell. I am a member of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska and lived both in Woodbury County and over in Story County. Recently moved back to Nebraska to my reservation. I'm happy to be here, but kind of sad to see Iowa in my back door. So thank you for inviting me tonight. First of all, I guess, do you have any questions, or do you just want me to share, or what do you want? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, I think to start, we would just like to hear a little bit about what your experience has been, some of the work you've been engaging with in Iowa.
Okay, great. So when I first moved to Iowa, I lived in Woodbury County, and I had never heard of caucusing. We had never done anything like that, but was super excited to participate. And so went to this little bitty church and caucused for the very first time for Bernie Sanders when he was running against Hillary, and became a precinct delegate. So went to the county level, and it was very, very interesting how in Woodbury County, it seemed to be that the delegates were already kind of chosen. And, if you were new to everything, you weren't really allowed to participate and kind of shut up and earn your stripes, basically. So there wasn't room for new people. So I participated as much as I could. And actually kind of I lived in the Leeds area, if you're familiar with that area. It's in Sioux City. So lived over there. And then when we moved to Story County, I got involved again with the Bernie campaign and actually started working with them. And one of the things that I really liked is that there were a number of people of color that worked for the campaign and were in leadership roles. And so that was really exciting. The hard part for me was that in Story County, there is a large Hispanic population, and the people that were supposed to be reaching out to them were over in Des Moines. Well, there were two minority people on our team that could have been working with them, and we were like, oh, go out and, you got to meet everybody. So that was a little bit harder. There was a special team that was supposed to do it, and it wasn't the people who were on the ground. So there's always things you can improve in any campaign, but that's one of the things I think I would improve there. In terms of voter suppression, what I have and have not seen is just that it's just like anywhere, like what the previous speaker was talking about, that we're 15% of the voter base in Iowa. And excuse me, baby. We have grandkids tonight, and so they want spaghetti for supper. But there's very few places where we're actually really, really concentrated enough to make a difference. And then when we do, you get the gerrymandering and you get all of that. I used to live in Rapid City, South Dakota, and one of the things that they would do, there's a huge enough Native population there that on their city council, you should have 3 or 4 Native Americans based on population if you did the grids the way that you're supposed to. But what they'll do is they'll come up from a very white neighborhood and like loop you over. And if you ever took a look at how they gerrymander their seats, at least in that city, you would just be blown away. They're very long, very skinny, and they get very wide where the non-Native groups are. So those things are real frustrating. Those are just, I don't know. The language barrier was always a thing too. And when you do caucuses in Iowa, I think those can be an issue. I worked one-on-one with a lot of volunteers that were going to be caucus volunteers. And it was very, very hard to get minority people to want to be a caucus volunteer. You got the ones that definitely did it. But if you were in a little bit more rural area, they're like, I don't know, you already know you're the odd person out. And then to stick your neck out for Bernie, for some of them, it was really hard. And they were afraid to do it. And so they did, a lot of them did stand up and do it, but it was hard for them to do. And a lot of times too, in Native communities, what I've seen, and even in the Hispanic communities that we worked with, is generally people vote as a block. They vote as a family. And if you're involved, like I'm really heavily involved and both of you are involved, we go around and we say, hey, family, vote, 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 vote. But you have those families that aren't like our families. And so they need people like us to get them interested in voting. And it's finding that person that will be that voice for that family. So those are the things I think that make a difference. Oftentimes it's hard to walk in the door and everybody seems like they know what they're doing, but you don't really know what they're doing. I was working on a project today for the organization I work with, and they're like, oh, do this. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. These new people coming in aren't going to know what they're doing. And that's the same thing with new voters or people that have rarely voted. They're oftentimes not really sure what to do. Do I walk in the door here? Do I go over there? The very first time I did a early ballot was in Story County. And as much as I think I know about voting, I was still very, very nervous to walk into the Story County courthouse, which if you're a brown person, you're always looking, do I have a ticket? I'm not naughty, but what if somebody I know was? But you're always checking in. You're a little bit nervous. I mean, anybody is going into that courthouse, but they laid it all out and you have to show your ID. And it was intimidating for me because to walk in there was a really long way into the courthouse. And it was hard. So, and I think I know more than the average person about voting like the two of you do.
Yeah. Joe was speaking about how in Iowa, early registration has been restricted and absentee voting as well. Could you speak a little bit on why this is such a barrier for our communities?
Well, I think what Joe said is a good point. So lots of times you get people of color that work shift work. And so when your polls are only open 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, or whatever the courthouse hours are, maybe 9 to 3, maybe they're not even open on Mondays, and you're a person who sleeps all day, or your job says, hey, you got to be here at this very weird time, taking time off to do that is really, really hard. And so it creates a financial barrier for families if they're not allowed to do an absentee vote or an early vote. And that's a big problem in Indian country because we do want to vote. So we do want to be a part of that process.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah. It was nice to be in the same room with two Keelys on one night. So, well, now that Al's here, I think it's time that we welcome him to the stage as well. So, Al Womble, hi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Keely. And don't worry, we'll be bringing everyone back on at the end.
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Hey, Al, would you like to give our audience an introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Al Womble, and I am the chair of the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus. You need much more than that, or?
Hey, that's perfectly fine with us.
I've spent the past couple of years doing voter education and voter registration throughout the entire state, everywhere from Sioux City, Council Bluffs, Keokuk, Mason City, Davenport, Clinton, Iowa. And, there are a lot of barriers that you have to try to break through when you're attempting to do that, especially since in a lot of the neighborhoods that I went to are neighborhoods that don't typically see voter outreach by either party, really. One party is obviously a little bit better at it than the other, but generally there's not a lot of voter outreach. There's not a lot of voter education. There's not a lot of voter registration that's being done in these particular neighborhoods. And so when it comes to the particular voting process, that's almost a form of suppression in and of itself. Not helping people understand how to do a thing is going to prevent them from doing that thing. And that is inappropriate. That is making sure that those people say that not only do you not only get a chance to express your voice by expressing your vote, but that prevents you from electing individuals who are from your community and who will represent you and who will represent your issues. And those are some of the things that we're going to have to work hard on, because you have to build that relationship. You have to build that trust. And that means showing up over and over again. They say that typically you have to ask somebody 3 times to do something in order for them to actually do it politically. I know you have to ask somebody 3 times to do something because I have daughters, and usually it takes a few more times than that for them to actually do what dad says. But occasionally they realize I'm right and follow through. But that's a whole different story.
So how did you get started with your Get Out the Vote work? And when did you really realize that voter suppression in Iowa was a big issue?
So it actually started many, many years ago before I even started going around, trying to go to different places, different events, and doing voter registrations. I've done voter registration at Latino Fest, at Pride Fest. I've done voter registration at all of those different things. And it really made me realize that, voter suppression is really real when I realized there was a lack of certain people who are not only being reached out to, but there was a certain community that also felt like, you know what? I don't see candidates that ever talk about the issues that affect my community. And the two things that really motivate candidates to do something or elected officials to do something, there's two things they are concerned about the most. And that is dollars donated to their campaign and votes. And if they don't ever address your issues, it's because they're not ever concerned that you're going to vote. And if they want to make sure that they can stray away and not pay attention to your issues, they're going to make sure those certain communities don't vote. And to me, it's something that needs to change. We need to say to ourselves, you know what? I may have just gotten off work. I may be tired. I maybe want to go home and have something to eat. I want to hang out with my friends. But you know what? This is something that's far more important. I've seen voter suppression in Iowa, everything from just not doing voter registration and education to people trying to specifically intimidate people when they go to the polls. And I know that when Keely, who was talking just before me, was talking about, some people do work odd shifts. That's true. But people don't know that in the state of Iowa, the law actually says that an employer has to give you time off in order to be able to vote. However, for a lot of individuals, the mere prospect of trying to talk to your employer that I need time off to go vote is scary and intimidating, because those employers will then try to intimidate those people and prevent them from going and, basically going to vote. That's their right. They should be able to vote. But people scare and intimidate individuals from voting, not only by trying to intimidate them at the polls, intimidating them at work, and by not, doing any sort of voter outreach or education. And to me, that is a thing where, I can no longer say I'm tired. I'd rather go home and just have dinner and, watch TV. If there's a way that I can go out and help make sure that I register people to vote, I'm going to do that. And we all should. We can no longer be able to sit on the sidelines and say, man, somebody should do something about that. Somebody who should do something about that is you. And you need to say, you know what? I have to step up my game, because this is far too important for me to sit back and hope someone else is going to do it.
Definitely.
That was very powerful. And I like that part of just you talking about the, who's the person? Well, I'm the person. So that was great.
Yeah. And I've found out that, you've got to, like I said, you got to build up trust. The first time you show up, people might be like, oh, that's interesting, they're here. Second time you show up, you're like, wow, they're back again. Third time you show up, they're like, okay, this person's serious. And you got to make sure you go to where people are. I remember when I was talking to somebody about, where to set up a voter registration booth to help people, the Black community vote in Davenport. And people said, oh, there's usually lots of people around the Starbucks. I'm like, the Starbucks? I'm like, I'm not going to use that word, but are you kidding me? I'm like, listen, I'm here to help the Black community vote. I'm not going to necessarily run into a bunch of people at the Starbucks. So you got to get to know that community. You got to go where they are. You got to build that trust, and sometimes that's a painful process. I kind of, it's kind of like dating. The first time you meet somebody, you might think, they're kind of nice, but I think they could be weird. I'm going to, shy off. You got to come in. You got to show interest in that person, in that community. You got to make sure that you go back. You got to make sure that, you're doing things that actually appeal to that community. You can't just show up with voter registration forms and stand on a corner. Believe me, I've done that before. That doesn't work. You just look like a weird guy with a pop-up tent of a, handful of forms. They think you might be trying to sell them Amway or convert them to Mormonism or something. You got to let them know that you are there for them. You got to build that trust and talk to folks.
Definitely. And during our Get Out the Vote campaign, we have been addressing various issues in order to, get people interested, realize what's at stake here. And so you also have to know what's important to the people who you're trying to get out to vote.
That's 100% right. When I traveled around the state doing voter registration all over the place, people didn't know who their city council person was. People didn't know who their mayor was. They didn't know who their state rep was. but they know that my streets have never been fixed in years. They know my kids' school is underfunded. They know that there's been no economic development in my neighborhood. So you're absolutely 100% right. It's talking about those issues. That's the way you really need to talk to folks. And that is how you create that sort of, relationship. How do you understand their issues?
Definitely. I'd like to welcome our other two guest speakers back up so we can have a little bit of a more conversation.
Great. It's good to be back here. I like what Al had to say. I mean, clearly what we've been trying to do in the Latino community over the last 20 years is to build capacity, just us regular folks knocking on doors, talking with people. It takes leadership, though. You have to find who wants to lead, who wants to be active in your community. And then you have to ask them to join with you to do voter engagement. It's as easy, again, as I said, going to your county election office, purchasing the voter file, going through that voter file to identify who's registered in your community. Sometimes it's difficult, other times it's not. Within the Latino community, we're actually pretty fortunate because, we can still filter through last names, Gomez's, Enriquez's, Garcia's. That gets about 80% of our community. But when we look at who's registered and which neighborhoods they're in, we walk those neighborhoods too. We talk with people. We encourage them to register to vote if they're not already registered. Another thing that's very important is that if you have activists who will join with you to go to a high school, high schools are really important places to register 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds to vote. In Des Moines, 1,500 kids every month become 18 years of age, every month in Des Moines. So we have spent time in high schools here in Des Moines at some points until they kick us out, which they have before, to register our young people to vote. Our median age for the Latino community is 23, which is 15 years younger than the white community. That is really amazing. So it's very important for us to go out there, talk with people, get them to register to vote, encouraging them to vote early, even though the law prevents us from picking up their ballot once they get it. We can still communicate with them, make sure they put the stamp on their return ballot envelope so they send it in. But hopefully through the lawsuit that we have, we'll be able to win that access. There is a chilling effect to now where voting on election day is only till 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. So that's been difficult for us too, having to educate our community members of the restriction in time, but making it really clear to them where they can vote in their community, down the street, in the neighborhood. Usually a polling location in high density areas is less than a mile away, but educating folks, but really trying to get your leaders and activists on board to do this work. For a long time, our activists wanted to focus on social media. They just wanted to put it out there on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever to please vote. That doesn't cut it. You have to have face-to-face discussions. You have to shake hands. And like Al said, you just can't have a table on the street corner and expect people to come up. You have to be in their community, knocking on doors, in classrooms, at schools, at grocery stores where they're going in and out, places like that. But those are all very important things. But again, establishing a baseline, getting that voter file. We in the Latino community are more than happy to help you with accessing voter files. If people want to get active, who are listening right now, we can help them. We can tell them where to go in their community. We can give them a letter that they can put their name on to request the voter file for their community. And we can help them understand how to go through that data so they can tabulate it and pull out those who they've identified as Latino voters, as voters from their community. Sorry about that. So those are things that we can do. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Joe said, you want somebody to go from attendee to volunteer to get out the vote lead. You want somebody to come along to whatever event, whatever you're doing. You want them to say, you know what, now I'm going to volunteer And now I'm going to make sure I'm going to get out the vote lead. I'm somebody you can count on to make sure that this kind of thing happens. One of the things, Joe was very good at the door to door. One of the things that, we've been successful with is holding events and getting people to register to vote that way. We had an event called the Black Women's Voter Rally over at Union Park in Des Moines. And we decided, how can we actually make this something that the community is going to come to? So we had singers, we had DJs, we had people set up, tables where they were selling different items. We had food, and we got a huge crowd out there that day. And we were able to fortunately register 22 people on that day, which usually with voter registration, that can be a tough day getting that many people registered. But it's like, sometimes people, we're going to throw an event. We're going to have these speakers and these speakers. Well, that's nice. But if I'm somebody who is like, say, a single mom, why am I going to come to this event just to sit with my kids in the hot sun and listen to a bunch of speakers all day? That's ridiculous. Or if I'm somebody who's maybe, out of work, why do I care about coming and listening to some politician speak? That's not appealing to me at all. But if we say, hey, we got food, we got music, we got other things, people will show up for stuff like that, and then that's when you can then connect with them. And like Joe said, have those one-on-one conversations, make sure you register to people to vote and make it issue based. In fact, I just had an issue based forum that we held in Iowa City. And we had over 100 people show up for that. And we didn't say anything about either party or anything. We said, this is a town hall on education, healthcare, and voting rights. And we offered free food and people showed up, so those kind of things, what do people really want to do? How can I make this an event that people want to come to? And then when you got them there, then you have a chance to have those conversations.
Yeah, wow. In my experience of doing get out the vote work, just sending a text message as opposed to, concretely asking, can you make it to the event? There's such a different response. So I definitely agree with everything that you've been saying.
Yeah, it's, I agree with Joe that a lot of people I remember during the years of the pandemic, one of the things that really frustrated me about, I will just say certain leaders of certain organizations, like, we post, stuff on our Facebook all the time. I'm like, Facebook, let me give you an idea. Nobody is looking at your Facebook page. I trust and believe nobody cares about your social media page. I can tell you that right now. You need to directly get into these neighborhoods and talk to folks. If you really want to reach somebody, look at somebody who actually does have a popular Facebook page. Like I said, a singer, a DJ, it's somebody. And then say, you know what, let's you and I combine on an event together to make something meaningful happen. And then when they put it on their Facebook page, people are going to notice it and show up. Doing a bunch of stuff through Zoom is a great way to organize. It's not necessarily always the best way to hold an event. Mm-hmm. My apologies for tonight because this is lovely, but it's for certain communities, you've got to be there in person. Social media is not going to cut it. And I can tell you that for the past couple events that I just threw, it was not only putting it out on social media, it was sending people emails and then following up with a phone call. That phone call had to take place. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was tedious and annoying work, but you know what? It made a difference in what actually happened on that day.
It really does make a difference. And once you, like Al was saying, once you get those people there and you start talking to them and you start noticing who's paying attention to you, who's listening, who am I affecting, who's hearing what I'm saying, and this person is standing out to you, and you start talking to them and you get that one person registered to vote, they're going to see that person stood up to register, and then they're going to bring these other people. They'll start following that other person. It makes it easier. It's harder to get the first one, but once you get the first one, then people say, yeah, I'll do that. So it does. It really makes a difference. The food makes a difference. The music makes a difference.
So, and it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, people need to realize I'm 65 years old now. My first time of standing on street corners was when I was 22 years old. So I've seen a lot of things happen over the years, over the last 4 decades, but it takes time. But it's so important for the voter file issue thing to be adopted. Activists need to learn how to use the voter file, because you're going to find out who actually votes in your community, which is very important. I can look and I can find out who's really doing the work out there. What's their history of voting? Do they vote? Which activists out there show a good history of voting? Who can I reach out to? And all are very important things.
One of the things I want to share is that in the Native American caucus, and I can't speak to what it's like in the other caucuses, but in the Native American caucus, you would think just Native Americans could vote, right? There are more non-natives in the Native American caucus, and they are the ones that are voting. And it's really tough to get around that. And so it's non-native people that are choosing our leaders in our caucus. And that's something that I hope that Alexandrea and Keely can change for us, because it's wrong. It is. It's just wrong. So I couldn't imagine, some white lady standing up in the Black caucus and saying, "I want to vote." Is she going to? No, but they have no problem doing that in the Native American caucus. They think that they can. And so that goes back to voter suppression and get out the vote, because then Native people that are trying to participate in the caucus, they say, well, it's not our caucus anyway, and we can't change this. So they leave it alone again for another 4 years, and then it comes back up again. It's really, really frustrating, and it's something that needs to be changed.
I want to pause here and tell all of our viewers, if you have any questions, please comment and we can put them up on the screen for our guests to answer. I know all of you have covered how time and energy extensive these efforts are for our communities. And with COVID, you're talking about food and events and stuff like that. So how have you adapted your strategies when being faced with the global pandemic?
We didn't really change our strategy. We, during the 2020 election, the Democratic Party how should I say, they were requiring their activists to not go door to door. We still went door to door. We did our 6-foot distance from people at the door, but we still did it because it was so important, because we knew a lot of our community members would still have difficulty voting on election day, that many did not vote early. And it was important for us. And we had a good turnout with the 2020 election here in Iowa. So we did not change course on that. We know that the Trump campaign did not change. They did not play it safe. They still did community outreach. They went out and got people to vote. So we have to realize that many of our working people within our community, since we're a high proportion, working people within brown and Black communities, Native American communities, that people will expect us to go to their door, to talk with them about the election. And don't be surprised when they say, I'm not sure who to vote for, because straight party ticket voting is no longer allowed in Iowa. That was something that was removed during the 2017 change here in the state of Iowa, which was another thing that we were not able to stop. So people need to know from your community, from our communities, how important it is to vote on election day if they haven't already voted, who to vote for, and where to go to vote on election day, because we have so many people who are registered to vote but are not regular voters, especially this year. In the 2022 election in November, we will have many people from our communities, brown and Black communities, who don't usually vote during this period of time. They only vote during the presidential election. So it's incumbent upon us to go door to door, go within neighborhoods, to talk with people. And we can start with baby steps, just starting within our own neighborhoods. We can help people with voter files to identify who's registered to vote and do those type of things. So baby steps first, but face-to-face contact is so, so important. People don't respond to texts anymore. Emails are dead. Facebook is dead. The only thing that's happening, I think, on social media is TikTok is really hitting the quite arousal. I mean, it's really inspiring people. So I think TikTok's there, but not alone. You got to go space.
The other part too, that to go along with what Joe is saying, when you do get that voter and they are going into to cast their ballot, and this just happened to me recently. I voted recently in an election here in Nebraska, and I filled out my ballot and went to shove it in the little machine, and it came back, and it wouldn't accept it, and I pushed it in, and it came back, and I pushed it in. Anyway, my ballot was spoiled, and I had to go all the way back through the process again, and so it does happen, and those are things that maybe not everybody, maybe somebody would have said, "Oh, I'm just going to leave." We have to let our people know, no, you don't leave, because every vote matters. Every single vote counts. And that one vote makes a difference. So I stuck it out.
Yeah, I think it's, well, when it came to the COVID and the pandemic, one of the ways that we kind of changed the way that we did things when we had events, like I said, being a construction guy, I have 200-foot long construction tapes. So I measured out distance, and then I marked those with little pin flags. So that when people came to the event, they knew that, okay, you're here at the event, stand here. Then you're going to be a safe distance from other people. We provided free masks. We had hand sanitizer all over the place. My garage is still filled with many bottles of hand sanitizer, just to make sure everybody could try to be safe. And Joe was right. We still went door to door because, the other team was doing that. And a lot of our people didn't do that. And unfortunately, that led to, a legislature right now, which is, passing more voter suppressive laws and other laws that aren't good for our communities. And the other thing that we tried really hard to do was to educate people on how to do, mail-in ballots. When you get them, how do you fill them out? When you get them back, what time frame do you have to fill them out? How do you make sure that you get that back in? Because, a lot of our people who do shift work or work at service industry type work, they're going to work odd shifts, so they may not be able to get off to vote. Having them understand that you don't necessarily always have to show up there in person. There's not only vote by mail, but there's voting early that you could do, and so it's like I said, it's not just that voter registration, is that voter education. What are the different options you have for yourself in order to be able to vote? And those are things that sometimes people are not aware of. Sometimes people think my only chance to vote is by going down on election day. Now, that is a great process, but some people don't have that time. So letting them know about voting early and vote by mail, I think should be one of our focuses coming up, so that people have their chance to vote.
Definitely. So
we have a question on screen if any of you would like to answer it. And the question is, could being a part of the minority communities one is looking to represent be a prerequisite to joining some of these decision-making organizations?
So for the Black Caucus, no. We say that to join the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus, all you have to be is somebody who cares about Black issues. You can join, you can be part of our events, you can volunteer and stuff like that. But we wrote I don't know if we want to say bylaws or constitution for the Black Caucus that said that, only individuals who are identified as, African American can be officers in the club. But anybody else can be a part of it. Anybody else can volunteer. Anybody else can help us form committees if they feel like there's a certain committee we should have and we don't have it. We've opened it up so that more people can be involved, because we realize there are allies out there. And sometimes one of the best things we can do for our allies is also help to educate them on what are the ways they can really help out. Sometimes one of the best ways they can help out is just come and volunteer or donate money, but make sure when it comes to those leadership positions, step aside and let somebody from that community lead. You don't need to center yourself and say, well, I'm part of this organization and now I'm the chair of this. Well, that's great, but you know what? That should really go to somebody from that community.
Mm-hmm. And in the Native American Caucus, ours is written the same way, where anybody can join, everybody is welcome, those kind of things. The officers have historically been from Native communities. The issue is that the people that are voting are the non-natives in the group. There's more of them than there are natives. And so that's where it comes back to what you're talking about, Al, with being centered. And so would the vote have turned out the way that it did had just the natives voted for who they wanted for leadership in the last few elections?
I think that is a very important point to bring up. And when leadership within the community is so important, but the voting of that leadership should be just from that community. So there probably, I would, the group that I'm a part of, LULAC, and also for Latino, we don't necessarily get involved in the Democratic Party's Hispanic Latino caucus as much, because we do realize that there is a tendency of people from the white community being a part of the Hispanic caucus, and generally there's more kind of an old guardish type of flavor there. Our focus has been within LULAC and for Latino is to really encourage getting our young people involved, helping them to become leaders. The key periods between the age of 18 to the mid-30s is a very important period to get young people engaged. And so we do that through LULAC, we do that through For Latino and some other groups to work on that. And that I think really helps on supporting the work of those activists who rise to the occasion for leadership, and then they are voted upon by the people in the community.
I do think that in order for us to change that in the Native American Caucus, the voting membership would have to change that to say, only the Native American people or identified natives can vote. And so that would mean, again, moving the centering from the non-natives that are in there and from the allies. And it goes back to the power struggle. So I brought it up a couple different times when I still lived in Iowa, and it went over not very well, we'll say.
What is the participation within the Native American Caucus?
When I've attended the meetings, we've usually had about 20 people attend the meetings, and there's usually very few natives, and the majority of every meeting I've been to has been non-natives, and they do all the voting, and it's always more of them than the natives that are doing the voting.
Well, it's to kind of get back to the historical flavor of where we've been at with the Latino community. We have been better at recruiting when we've recruited through some of our historic organizations like LULAC, which is the oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization in the country. For Latinos, another one. So just, a suggestion might be if you were to organize with some of your historic civil rights groups outside of the Democratic Party, working within that arena might help you with that, because there probably would be more of a tendency to get to where you want to get to. I know, Al, with the NAACP, you get a lot of people from different communities to be a part of the NAACP. So, but you really haven't. I don't know if they've experienced the same problem as you have, Keely. But it's worth trying another group to work on getting helping new leadership.
Well, I just think a lot of it is there's people that don't want to rock the boat, and they're trying to play nice, and it but in the meantime it means the Native American caucus is very, very white-centered.
Yeah. And we had this problem with the Hispanic caucus too. The Democratic Party is where we had, good people, but had been,
Very
part
good
of the
people.
party for decades. And they did not want to rock the boat. But yet we had many young people who they wanted change. They were experiencing the exploitation that their family was going through, and they wanted change to happen.
Mhm.
And they wanted issues to be addressed that the party was not addressing. So, so they felt that they needed to work within other groups outside of that caucus to make those changes happen. So it's probably the same thing that you all are going through. Maybe, maybe not.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Well, you know your power. You know your power, and
Mhm.
the movement. The BLM movement in 2020 really inspired a lot of people and raised the consciousness of those outside of brown and black communities. But tremendous opportunities for young people to lead in whatever format, be it BLM or Native American groups, other groups. So many opportunities, but I think again that goes back to voter bases, working with other activists within the community, establishing your group on that. But another thing is if there is a group outside of your caucus that has a historical perspective, that group will also be very useful with the media because the media will access the history of your organization before they interview you, and also when they do articles. So that's why I chose LULAC years ago. Was I knew that the media would know who we were. They would realize that we were legitimate, that we were more than just a caucus, an appendage of a political party, and that they would ask more important questions posed to us because of our history of fighting for over 100 years, or nearly 100 years. So I'm betting that there are a number of Native American indigenous organizations out there that you could be a part of that have that historical flavor that would provide opportunities for newspaper articles, interviews about what's happening on different issues impacting your community, and would be a way to draw young people to that organization, because I'm sure there's groups like that they could read books about, learn about, and then of course you could do articles and take on positions with those groups.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the final question now. So what can the viewers at home do to get out the vote, in your guys' opinions?
I would say the most important thing is to commit to it. You have to make a commitment to yourself that, I like I said before, I'm not going to be tired. I'm not going to say I'm too busy. I'm going to miss seeing this movie or something else with my friends. It's just like if you want to be an Olympic athlete, you're going to commit to that. You're going to make sure that you work out. You're going to make sure you eat right. You're going to do all those things. If you commit to, making sure that people are registered and ready to vote, you're going to make sure that you go out there and, like Joe said, you're going to make those connections with different leaders in the community, with different organizations in the community. How can we collaborate? How can we work together to create an event? You're also going to make sure that, you sometimes allow those individuals to lead. We've had different events where we don't splash our name all over it and say, this is the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus doing this. We just have an event and we put other people's names on it, or whatever that we need to do in order to make sure that we get out the vote and that we, are actually making connections with individuals. When we were just talking about individuals who are centering, sometimes we as an organization don't always need to center. How do we make sure that we're being inclusive with other organizations and say, listen, we'll help organize this, we'll help put together the manpower, but we need you to reach out within the community and we're going to help do that. It's all about, making sure that this is something that I see is important, and keep finding new ways. And, and also like Joe said, just because you tried one thing and it failed doesn't mean like, oh, well, we're never going to do that again. No, try again. Some of the best people in the world have tried and tried again and failed so many times, but have said, you know what, I'm going to try it again. You know, don't let failure be the thing that stops you. Let that be the thing that teaches you how to do something different the next time, so that next time, you know, like, I'm going to do this better, I'm going to do that better. You know, and you know, I guess the last thing that I would say is that, you know, always understand that you can learn from anybody. Even if it's somebody that you don't like, you can learn something from them and you can incorporate that into what you're doing.
Thank you so much for sharing all those things. Anyone else have anything to add? Oh, Keely, you're muted. Hold on one second.
For a very long time, I actually carried voter registration cards in my purse when I lived in Iowa. And if someone told me they weren't a voter, I'm like, oh my God, I just happen to have this right here. And it wasn't anything for me to spend a few cents and put a stamp on it and send it in, or just get them to fill it out. So I'll do the same thing here in Nebraska, and it's one person at a time. It's every little step. Like maybe that person will think, oh, she's being silly or she's taking this too seriously. But come election day, maybe that little talk with me is what's going to say, you know what? I filled that form out with Keely. I think I'm going to go and let my vote count. But that's one thing I did, is carried them in my purse. Some of them were all wrinkly, but they were.
Well, all right. Joe, do you have anything to add before we wrap up tonight?
Oh, me?
Yep.
Oh, I think we need to have more discussions like this. I think we need workshops. I know Elle and I will both volunteer to be there. You know, the thing that I learned when in my young days was that young activists appreciate it when they have something local to go to where they can learn new ideas. They appreciate hearing from their elders, from mentors. There needs to be events that cater to new people and young people in communities. Both Al and I would be more than happy to jump in a car together, go to any community in Iowa, and talk about how to do this. So I think you can count on both of us to be there. We want to embrace our communities of color, our diversity. The Indigenous community is so important. The things that are happening in this state with the state legislature is so unfair. The book banning, the inability to talk about our history of racism. So count Elle and I in. We want to go to any community where you can invite us. We'll be there in restaurants and in homes, at the kitchen table. We would love to talk with activists, and we want you to lead us. We'll be there for you.
I'll just say one last thing. If you really want to turn out your community vote, get somebody from your community to run for office. Nothing excites people like saying, wait a minute, someone from my community could actually be on the school board or the city council. Let's go do this thing. You know, there was a young lady who did that here in Des Moines. Her name is Indira. People thought she couldn't do it, but guess what? Her community got excited about the fact that she was running and they turned out. So sometimes it has to be somebody like Neely. Yes, I'm pointing at both of you. You just got to decide, you know what? I'm going to go for it. And that's going to help turn people out too.
Thank you so much. One more question. Somebody in chat just asked where we could find your information to get in contact with you wonderful people. So if you guys want to, you know, shout out like a handle or something, feel free to do that before we end the show tonight.
Ooh, IowaLatinos.org. IowaLatinos.org.
I would say just look me up on Facebook, Al Womble, or look up the Black Caucus of the Iowa Democratic Party on Facebook. Either of those ways, you'll be able to reach me. And, I always welcome people who are ready to fight or who want information so that they can fight. It's got to happen, and it's got to happen now. Because, people have said they're nervous or they're worried about this upcoming election, what's going to happen. I'm not nervous or worried. I'm pissed. I'm ready to fight, and I need other people who are ready to fight too.
Keely, you're muted again.
Same as Al. You can look me up on Facebook. Reach out to Alexandria. She's got my number. And if you're an emailer, I know Joe said it's dead, but I still like email. Keely Purscell at Gmail. So I'm around. Just let me know, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Thank you all
of you.
so much. I know we're a little over time, but we really appreciate everything that you've gotten to share with us tonight. And I hope that we can do future collaborations like Joe mentioned. So super excited for that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.